Hello, welcome back to the desk corner. In today's video, I am drawing Rosa Parks, and I thought that it would be fun to do a little skin tutorial. I'm probably going to make a couple of videos out of this drawing because it's going to take me a while to do. So I'm going to be using graphite pencils and charcoal pencil, just so you guys know, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the methods I'm using to create realistic looking skin. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll talk a little bit about what pencils I'm using specifically. When you're starting off with a portrait, you can start with whichever area you want, but I typically like to start with the eyes, nose, and mouth area and then work out from there. But I'm not really going to do this in this drawing because of the nature of this tutorial, which is supposed to be a skin tutorial. So I'm going to go back to the eyes later, and what I'm going to do is start out with the nose. And I have my pencil pretty sharp for this because I'm working on detail areas where the nostril is and the shape of the nose. So it is important to keep your pencil sharp when you're working on detail areas like that. But I am using more of the side of the pencil to actually do the shading. And for the shading itself, I'm using mostly circular motions, which I do have a graphite tutorial video for beginners. I actually have two of those if you want to know more about different shading and blending methods that I use. If you're more of a beginner, I'll link those in the description below though. I like to use circular motions because it doesn't create too many visible lines in your end result, and with something like skin you don't want there to be many visible lines. You can also use like light cross hatching, and that usually gets rid of lines going in just one direction, so that's okay too. But with graphite, if you're going to blend out with something like a Q-tip or a tissue, you don't have to worry too much because that's going to really spread the graphite around and get rid of any lines as long as you're not pressing super hard. Now for this, I'm not going to be actually blending out. I'm just going to be using the pencil itself for this tutorial, and I'm just layering a lot, so you will see I might use a Q-tip a little bit in this tutorial, but for the most part I think I'm pretty much just using the pencils themselves, which might be helpful for some of you that are just blending with the pencils themselves. Now I'm slowly building up shadowed areas and leaving my highlights lighter, and when you're building up shadow areas, it's important that you are aware of how much pressure you're putting, because if you put too much pressure at the beginning, you won't be able to add more. If you're working on an area that's super dark, like the nostrils for example, you can just add in a really dark shadow right away because there's not really a need to build up. But if you're working on a shadow that's a little bit lighter, like for example, the shape of the nose, you could see there's a couple of shadows that are darker, but not as dark as the nostril, of course, then you want to build up a little bit more slowly. You can always add, but it's a little harder to take away. You can use a kneaded eraser, which I really recommend using a kneaded eraser to lightly pick up extra graphite if you accidentally add too much, not using just a giant white eraser because you're going to lift up way too much and you'll have to redo the whole area probably. So definitely use a kneaded eraser and just tap on an area that you added too much graphite to if you need to remove some. Or you can use a little detail eraser too to just remove a small area, like I like to use a Tombow Mono Zero eraser. Now as I start to move more towards the cheeks, I'm going to kind of identify those laugh lines and other wrinkled areas and detail areas like that first, because when you're just shading a wide open area of skin, you don't need to worry too much about detailed areas. I like to just use cross hatching or something like that for just a large area of skin, but you want to make sure that you don't lose your details, like where laugh lines are supposed to be, where the top of the lips start, and things like that. I'm kind of just working one area at a time here, but I haven't finished the nose completely or other areas at the top, because sometimes I get bored if I just stay on one area too long, and I like to kind of venture out and start working on other areas and developing those areas too. You don't necessarily need to finish an entire area before moving on. It's kind of just whatever method you like better. You can work on one area until it's done, or you can just kind of go back and forth between areas, which actually there might be benefits to doing that because you can compare one area of the portrait to another and you can really see how much more you want to add based on that. So I do recommend kind of not just working on one area only and finishing it and then moving on, especially if you're more of a beginner, because that can make things a little bit harder. Oh, there is something I want to talk about here. So when you have like lines like this, like for example, laugh lines or wrinkles, you don't want them to be too harsh or sharp looking. So what I like to do is add a lot of shading around it, even if it's light shading, and I like to use circular motions with my pencil. So you have a defined line where the laugh line is, and it really helps to make sure that the laugh line looks a little bit like organic. How do I explain it? Like, you don't want the line to be even. You want to make sure it's wider in some areas, lighter in some areas, thinner in some areas, and that just makes it look a little less cartoonish. And then what you can do is what I'm doing here, and you could see me doing a lot of that, is taking my pencil and just doing little circular motions so that it kind of blends the line out and you can't really see exactly where the line is. It blends it out more into the skin, makes it look a little more natural. And I'll do the same exact thing when I'm working on the edges of the face so that I don't get any type of harsh outline. The edges of the face and other detailed areas for me are the hardest because you really have to work to make sure they don't turn out too sharp or anything like that. Whereas when you're working on a wider area, on the skin, it's not as hard. I like to use cross-hatching, as I've mentioned before, and I've talked about that in my Graphite for Beginners videos, which I have linked down below in case these terms are unfamiliar to you if you're a beginner. But anyways, you could see me going in and still working on that skin on the left-hand side by the ear, and I am identifying where the wrinkles or laugh lines are, and I'm shading those in first to make sure I don't lose that detail. I have to be really careful with this portrait because we have glasses. I don't normally draw portraits with glasses, so that's going to be interesting to work on. So I have to be really careful because I don't want the glasses shape to get messed up at all. If it is messed up, it's not going to look realistic, so I'm going to be very careful not to accidentally erase any of my details over there while I'm working on the skin. And you can see the skin slowly comes to life. You want to leave your highlighted areas pretty light and your shadowed areas, you know, just keep developing them until you're happy with it. I'm mostly using graphite here. You could really see where I've used charcoal in the nostril because it's so much darker than the other areas. And now I'm going to go in and use charcoal to fill in a shadow on her neck. And so if you have a really dark shadow and you're going to use charcoal for that, at first it's going to look pretty harsh against the graphite, as you can see. So it's going to look harsh, especially because I haven't really fully developed those graphite areas yet, but you do also notice that I haven't really pressed super hard with my graphite. So it's still possible for me to put charcoal on top of graphite at this point, and that's because I haven't created too much of a shiny surface with my graphite, which is kind of what happens when you press really hard with your graphite and you get a shiny look to it. You can't add charcoal on top of that. So please be aware, if you're using charcoal and graphite together, you don't want to create too many layers of graphite using hard pressure because it'll just create like a sheen of graphite that you won't be able to add charcoal on top to because the charcoal won't stick to it really anymore. So that's why for really dark areas, I recommend just going straight in with the charcoal. Don't even bother trying to do layers of graphite first. But if you just want to add a little bit of charcoal on top of a shadowed area to make it a little bit darker, then you can add that on top of graphite, as long as you don't have too many layers of graphite first. And if you're not used to using charcoal and graphite together, I recommend practicing before you go in and do a portrait, obviously. So now what I'm doing is just creating some more of those shadows that appear around the eyes, and those are because of the glasses. Those are not normal shadows that would just be there, so just be aware glasses make things a lot more complicated. There's going to be a lot more shadows and things like that. You don't have to worry about that if you're not drawing someone who is wearing glasses. So yeah, that's going to be a little more complicated than usual there. I do want to say that with the lips, which I'm going to start to work on in a second, you want to be careful just because it's easy to lose the shape. So I have a hard time sketching lips in general. Like, the shape is very difficult for me to get. And once you do get it and you start shading around in the skin around the lips, you can easily lose where the outline of the lips were in the first place. Then you kind of have to go back and keep fixing it because it won't look right. And you'll have to like try to redo your sketch while you've already shaded, and that's just a whole ordeal. So what I like to do is for the lips, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and shade them a little bit darker than the surrounding skin so I can easily see where they are. And of course they are going to be darker than the surrounding skin anyways in the end result. So I'm just going to go in, make sure they look a little darker than the skin around it so that I can really see where the lips start, and that way when I'm working on the skin around it, I can be careful not to accidentally kind of blend the skin too much into the lips. Now I'm not saying you need like a harsh line around the lips or anything, I'm just saying it's easy to forget where the lips are supposed to be and then therefore kind of just blend them into the skin so much that you don't even have any sort of indication of where the lips even are anymore. So yeah, that's that. And then I'm going in to work on the teeth. Now the teeth are a little bit tricky. I'm kind of just adding in some shadows where the gums on the top and the bottom are, and you don't want to add too much to the middle because if you create too many sharp lines, it's going to look like cartoon teeth, which we don't want either. You want to be careful about outlining the teeth. You just want to make sure that you are shading in the gums really nicely, and then as for separating each tooth, you don't have to do much at all, just a little light line. Sometimes it's just going to be like half a line. Some of the lines are going to be darker than others. Again, variations in lines can really help to make sure that you don't get anything too cartoonish or outline looking, which is what we want to avoid when creating realistic drawings. That being said though, when you're working on a portrait of someone who's older, you're going to have a lot more like detail lines than you would if you're working on someone with smoother skin who might be younger. So you are going to see more lines in this portrait than usual, and it's sometimes a challenge to work on someone, a portrait of someone who's a little bit older, because then you've got a lot more details in the skin to work on, but it's great practice, I would say. And I'm really rendering those areas like the laugh lines. You want to be careful with this. You don't want to just go in and super, like right away, do a super dark line and then suddenly you just have this like really annoying, harsh, obnoxious line. You kind of just want to build it up and keep blending it into the surrounding skin. That's why you have these shadows all around the laugh lines. As you can see, there will be a laugh line or a wrinkle, and then you'll see there's shadows around it that help it blend into the surrounding skin and look a little bit softer. Again, I'm using circular motions and then cross-hatching sometimes to shade. I'm never going to use too much of a linear stroke. It's not a problem to shade in a linear motion, but if you are going to, then you probably want to use a tissue or something to blend out, and since I'm trying to avoid using much to blend besides the pencils themselves, it'll be easier if I keep shading in more circular motions, and that way I don't have too many lines to blend out, because when you're blending out, one of the things that you're doing is getting rid of like pencil lines. And if you don't have many pencil lines to begin with, you don't have to blend out quite as much, so that's a little trick. And then sometimes you want a really smooth look, and I totally understand that, and in that case you're using a tissue or something to blend out the graphite and get a smoother look. But if you are one of those people that likes a little more texture in your drawing, you don't want it to be completely smooth, then you don't actually have to go in and blend it out completely smooth with a tissue or a Q-tip. You can just kind of be careful with your pencil lines while you're shading, because you don't want any pencil lines to be showing through in the end. And you can really achieve that by, shading with the side of your pencil, using circular motions. I go over this in my beginners for graphite, or what, no, I said that backwards, my graphite for beginners video. So yeah, I go over a couple of different methods. I'm linking that down below for those of you that are interested. I feel like I've hardly been breathing at all during this because I'm trying to pack as much information as possible, which is why I'm going to split this video into parts, or this drawing into different videos, because that way you guys can see some different stages of the drawing, and I can, I have it sped up, but I don't want to speed it up any more than this because it'll be hard to see what I'm doing. But as we kind of near the end of this video, I am kind of working on the neck and chin area because it's really harsh at the moment and I want to blend it out more. There's a really harsh shadow in the neck, and also there's some harsher shadows on the chin. So I'm going to slowly start to build those up with my charcoal pencil. And by doing that, I'm able to slowly transition from the graphite areas into the charcoal areas, which are a lot darker, because graphite is more of a grayish tint to it, and then charcoal is straight up black. So that's another thing. And I'm using oil-based charcoal, which is a lot less messy. If you're using a really soft charcoal, like a General's charcoal pencil, you can actually use that to kind of just smear the powder onto your drawing directly with a Q-tip or something, because charcoal pencils typically give off a lot of dust, and you can use that to blend right into the graphite with a Q-tip or a tissue or something like that, and that'll help create a transition. with the oil-based charcoal pencils that I'm using in this drawing, they don't create as much dust. And that's actually a benefit for me because I don't like a super messy, dusty drawing. But if you prefer normal charcoal pencils like Generals, for example, it's easy to blend them into the graphite because you can just directly blend them out with like a Q-tip, and it actually turns out really nice and you get a nice smooth blend doing that. You can also see that sometimes there's a highlighted area right next to a dark shadow, like in the chin, some of those lines on the chin. You will see that, and sometimes that's a good thing. It adds more contrast, and don't be afraid to have some shadows, harsher shadows next to a highlight, but you can see that there's a little transition, so I've blended it a little bit. It doesn't look too harsh. You can have a really dark shadow next to a brighter highlight, and as long as you transition a little, just use a pencil, create some strokes with the circular motions, just gently transition, make it look a little bit softer, and then it's gonna look fine, and it actually looks pretty realistic. And yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else important to mention in this video. I am going to create another one. This is far too large of a portrait, or far too long of a portrait in order for me to just make one video about the skin, so I'm definitely going to make another one. And yeah, especially because this is a more complicated portrait than what I usually do. So yeah, I think that that's going to be all for this video, you guys. So I'm just sharing my methods with you guys, hoping that it'll help some of you out. And of course, everyone is slightly different in how they like to shade and all that, but these are the methods that work for me and what I like to do. And I hope that it's helpful for you guys. And I will see you guys in the next video. I'll have multiple parts of this coming out eventually. And yeah, so thank you guys as always so much for watching. Bye guys.